Hi, this is Josh Marshall from TPM Media. It's Thursday, April 3rd, 2008, and this is episode 18 of our weekly Campaign 2008 Roundup. You know, race and racialized voting has gotten a lot of attention in the Democratic primary race over the last several weeks, particularly how it may have affected the vote in Ohio and how it may affect the vote coming up in Pennsylvania. In both cases, the idea being that white working class voters, particularly in the southern parts of those two states, are not as willing to vote for Barack Obama as Democratic voters are in other states. Now, Hillary Clinton's advisors are now making the case to superdelegates that because of Barack Obama's association with Reverend Jeremiah Wright, he's not electable, that white voters, because of that connection, will simply not vote for him in the numbers necessary to elect him president. And although they have not said it on the record, there have been a number of reporters speaking to advisors off the record on background, that what the Clinton campaign is really looking for, hoping for after Pennsylvania, are exit polls that show a high degree of racialized voting. That is to say, white voters in large amounts unwilling to vote for Barack Obama. So with all that out there, we're going to take a look at a couple of attempts that people have made to take account of the role of race in the Democratic primary campaign. Now, one of these is an article by David Sirota writing in These Times, and in that article he talks about something he calls the race chasm, and he has a chart that we're going to look at here. Now, as you can see, this is a list of 33 of the 42 primary and caucus contests so far in the Democratic race, and if you want to know Sirota's rationale for excluding those 9 other contests, go to In These Times, and he explains it in the article. But as you can see, on the y-axis is Obama's margin of victory or defeat in various states, and the x-axis is how states in the country are ranked based on the size of their African American populations. So what you can see here is that Barack Obama is basically winning all the states until they get to about 6% African American population in those states. Then after that, he loses most of the states up until the black population gets to about 17%, and after that, he wins again. So the point here is basically that in states with very low African American populations, Barack Obama gets high percentages of the black vote, but it's in those states right in the middle where there is a large enough African American population to have strongly racialized voting, patterns of racialized voting, but not a large enough African American community to show up substantially in the polls, that he's losing most of those races. And as you can see, in that category are states like Ohio, New Jersey, Florida, Massachusetts, etc. Now, one of Sirota's critics, a guy named Brendan Nyan at his own blog, writes a critique of Sirota's article, and basically he makes a series of arguments, one of which is that you have to separate out caucuses versus primaries since people vote differently in those two different kinds of contests. Nyan slices and dices the information in different ways. He looks not at rankings of African American populations, but the actual numbers of the size of the African American population in different states. But basically what he comes down to is this graph, which I'm showing you now. And as you can see, what he does here, he says that the real issue is white support for Obama, and you can see a pretty clear, just one downward sloping line from left to right. And what it shows is the larger the African American population in the state, the worse Obama does among white voters. Now, looking at these two charts and these two arguments, I'm really not sure that Nyan is saying anything different from what Sirota is saying. What it really is Sirota's argument is Nyan's numbers put through the sieve of a Democratic primary contest. Now, let's take a few things into account. Blacks overwhelmingly support and register as Democrats in this country. So if you have a state that has 15% African American vote, that usually means that you're going to have 30% in the primary electorate in Democratic primary. So if you look again at the Sirota graph, again, really pretty much saying the same thing. In states with small African American communities, Barack Obama gets really high percentages of the white vote. That allows him to win. You get to a place in the middle where there's a large enough African American community to lead to a racial polarization of the electorate, but not a large enough African American community for Obama to be able to have that vote basically overcome the racialized vote of the white community and come out on top. So you see there in Virginia, Georgia, South Carolina, DC, Mississippi, Louisiana, etc. So again, I think they're saying pretty much the same thing, just looking at the numbers in a different way. So what does it all mean? I think the numbers are striking enough that you can't completely dismiss this analysis. There's definitely something there. On the other hand, there are a lot of other factors in this race besides race, not least of which are patterns of ethnicity, the way these different states were settled, economic patterns, so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, with 33 states, you just don't have that big a data set to necessarily be able to make clear conclusions. Now, just one example would be education rates in the different states. That may be a reason why you see different voting patterns in the upper Midwest, in states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, etc., than you see in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania. The white community in those states is also made up differently in ethnic terms in places like the Rust Belt states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, again, versus Wisconsin and Minnesota. The other question is, how do these dynamics play out in a general election versus in a primary election? Now, let's, for the sake of discussion, take Sirota's argument as granted that in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, etc., that Democrats, given a choice between a white Democrat and a black Democrat, white Democrats tend to vote for the white Democrat. Now, that leaves unanswered the question of, in a general election, would those white voters who would prefer a white Democrat to a black Democrat, would they vote for the white Republican against the black Democrat? That's something you really can't get out of this data. Second, let's take the role of gender. If you look at the exit polls in state after state, gender is clearly playing a really big role in this primary contest. So if you end up having two male candidates in the general election, if you take gender out of the equation to the extent you ever can, how will that affect these numbers? Now, we have the vote in Pennsylvania coming up on April 22nd, about 3 weeks from now. Then we'll have a lot more data, and we'll revisit these questions then to tell you more. I'm Josh Marshall from TPM Media, and we'll talk to you next week.